to everyone for joining us today. For those who came back and for those who are here for the first time, it's a real pleasure to meet you online and still meet you anyway. So I will be introducing this presentation that was prepared by Paola Demartini, Michela Marchegiani, and myself. It's the main aim of this presentation is actually to explain the rationale that led all the consortium to come up with the Deliver 1.2 that you have received a couple of days I think on Monday or Tuesday, sorry, I don't recall well. So the idea was to pave the way for the proper holistic impact assessment model definition or drafting. And in this deliverable, we are focusing on the relation between goals, impacts, and assessment. So in this presentation, we are going to explain in detail what we mean and what actually we kindly ask you to help us achieving. As I said, we envisioned this deliverable which as a bridge between the first one, which was the review of the literature on policy programs and good and bad practice, towards the definition of the draft version of holistic impact assessment model. So what we did in deliverable 1.2 that you find in the document you received is to focus to go more into the details of the gaps and shortcomings that we detected already in the Deliver 1.1, and that were also recalled earlier by Riva and in the first day of our meeting. And you find these in paragraph number 2. Then we focused on the methods that are used for assessing the impacts, so that are currently used. Since what we found in the literature review is that there is a wide array, a plurality of impact assessment models. We have talked about this already in the first day. So in the document, you find a detailed description of these methods with a focus on those that are, let's say, most widely used for each domain in the first paragraph. And then we also focused on the methods that can be considered cross domains, let's say, that embrace at least two, let's say more than one domain. We also try to analyze more in details those methods that can be considered cross domains. And you will find, or you already read the description and the discussion of especially Impact 08 method that focuses on the impact assessment of Liverpool as ECOC, as you all know, because we took this as an example of a cross-domain method. So this first part that is described in paragraphs 2 and 3 is, let's say, it's closer to the first deliverable than to the third one. But then we moved on, and to find a better, let's say, linkage that could drive us to the drafting of the holistic impact assessment model, we sought a way to facilitate this connection between the existent body of knowledge and what we are going to propose. So we thought that it's important to focus on the relations between the objectives that lay beyond the interventions on cultural heritage. So we focused on the objectives of the interventions in cultural heritage and the expected or desired impacts that in a way are recalled by these interventions and that are coherent with these objectives, and later the impact assessment of these impacts that are desired or expected. So what we want to say is that before delving into the analysis of the impact assessment models, it is necessary to go back to make let's say, a step beyond, and to go back to the original objectives that motivate each intervention on cultural heritage. And the sources that we analyze for describing these relations are basically policy documents, academic and administrative reports, and social platforms. And Paola will talk more later about these sources and these relations. So in our minds, these relations, describing these relations will also allows us to propose a framework for collecting information from you and useful, insightful suggestions in order to finally build the draft of the impact assessment model. And in the conclusion of the documents, you can read how we envisage this framework for getting inputs from you in a, let's say, in an analytical way. And Paola will also explain to you better what we mean by this framework. What I was stressing out is that we believe it's important to define and to understand the objectives of each intervention on cultural heritage, as I was saying. And those objectives can be actually quite diverse and can be sometimes maybe overlapping or even conflicting in some cases. So only having cleared what objectives are, what the desired or expected impacts are, we are able to come up with a good, let's say, a coherent assessment of those impacts. In order to, let's say, have a clearer picture, we believe that it's important to analyze at least 3 levels: the macro level, which is the European level, or the supranational level. For example, at the macro level, in terms of policy, we can recall the European Framework for Action on Cultural Heritage, because the objectives are defined at the macro level and somehow also condition the subsequent level, which is the meso level, that we identify as the national single EU states. But there is also the micro level that each individual project, of course, like for example, we put this Veneria renovation project, and at the micro level should also be consistent with the other levels. So in terms of sources, we start with policies, and I give the floor to Paola.
Okay, policy document established the strategic framework for cultural actions. Yeah, and of course, within these policy documents, goals are described as macro objectives or goals, themes, and pillars. In our work altogether, we have highlighted some of the main policy documents, and here you can see on the screen the European Framework for Action on Cultural Heritage. But of course, this is only one of the most important. What is the shortcoming? What's the problem for our research? And the problem is that, of course, there are several frameworks at the European level, and sometimes this is a little bit confusing to understand, to highlight what are the main and strategic goals. Then there is another problem, is that policy documents are linked to the political priorities of the historical moments in which they have been built. And of course, there is the last and we think main shortcoming is that as the European Court of Auditors highlighted in 2020, strategies and laws of intervention funds should be interconnected. And another point which is very important is that realistic objectives should be set. So for our work, of course, policy documents are a kind of framework, but it's difficult to highlight what Riva said before, talking about cultural value for whom. Then there is another source that we found very important, which is report documents, in which it's easier to find clear objectives, to understand how we can draft the relationship between objectives, of course, expected impact and impact assessment. And these documents are elaborated by a variety of organizations with different aims. We have administrative aims. We talked about the European Court of Auditors. Then we have a technical organization, and here you can see on the screen side the ICOMOS last report, very important, which highlight quality principle for the intervention on cultural heritage. And as Riva highlighted before, this document is most concentrated and focused on process than on operational guidance for highlighting objectives and impact assessment. So it's really important, but for our research, for our model, still miss the relationship between objectives, impact and almost all impact assessment model. Then there is also another important document, which is scientific research, and everybody I think knows the cultural heritage for counts for Europe, which was drafted and published in 2015, and it was the first document that also Erminia Sciacchitano mentioned in his presentation, because focused on impact. It was the first documents recognized also at the European policy level, because impact analysis was highlighted. And it was important to understand, reading the documents, that cultural heritage intervention matter and has an impact in different domains. And another important aspect highlighted by this document is that impacts can be also unexpected and can be positives and negatives as well. What is the shortcoming for Count for Europe? Of course, it has been published in 2015 and based on a huge amount of case studies, but of course, time is moving on. And another point is that impact has been highlighted, but how to measure, to describe this impact. So an impact assessment model is not being included in these documents. And another shortcoming, which is a general one, is these objectives are defined by different kinds of experts. They can be administrative experts, like the European Court of Auditors, which highlight very technical and precise shortcomings considering the cultural interventions. Or also can be experts like researchers or technicians. Therefore, there is a new approach that the SoPHIA project underlined, and is please Lucia, can you go on? Is the social platforms source. This is a new one, and we think that it was very important, and also our EB members in their revision of our D11 say that this is very worthwhile. Why? Because as you can see in the screen, even in this second report that you received, we highlighted, and you can see under the SoPHIA project has introduced social platform analysis. You can see how many social platforms have been scrutinized by our teams, by our consortiums. And also we try to make a kind of categorization of different social platforms from European Union or non-European Union framework, private, public, municipal social platform. And why social platform matters? Why? Because they can promote new objectives, new ideas, a new way to think, and also what is most important, they can raise the attention of policy makers, and they can influence the new agenda of policy makers as regard as cultural interventions at the European level and national, local level. Please, Lucia. Here you can find only some of the main, but only different social platform. We chose REACH, which is a Horizon 2020 social platform on cultural heritage for a wider participation, but also you can have the Cultural and Creative City Monitors, which is more a technical social platform, and it's important for cities and urban planners, just to have a kind of monitoring and debates on how to evaluate the impact assessment of cultural heritage interventions. Also, I think that there are other social platforms. I chose American for the Arts only because it's completely private. It's not funded by public funds. Is a private social platform discussing and debating arts with a social perspectives. So the two themes, arts and arts impact on civil society, is one of the main themes. Finally, I found Heritage on the Edge, which is a product by Google. Of course, this is more for, how can I say, probably Google marketing goals, but I found it very interesting. And I think that, of course, everything that Google's does it's something that has a kind of influence and impact on, it's a kind of narrative. But these are only some of the main and different social platforms that we have scrutinized. What is the shortcoming about the objectives that have been highlighted and that are promoted by social platforms? They are defined by communities or different type of lobbies that can be politics or grassroots movements or private or organization based. So of course they offer a kind of, how can I say, community-based perspectives, which of course it's not enough. What we wanted to do, we wanted just to, in our work, we wanted just to offer you as stakeholders and DB members, of course, a kind of, how can I say, window picture of the different sources that can be considered when objective should be highlighted, and what kind of objective should guide, of course, impact assessment. Of course, as Riva said in the introductions, SoPHIA's analytical concept propose a new approach to reason about impact assessment. This is not an impact assessment model, is a way to gather opinion, suggestion, information. And our approach is based on 3 axes. They are current, they are interlinked, and of course, they are based on some of the pillars promoted by the European Union's policy documents. An impact assessment should deserve attention to people. People means a multi-stakeholder approach. So it's important to consider the communities. It's important to consider who has a stake. A stakeholder, it can be an individual, can be an organization, can be a group who has direct or indirect interest in cultural intervention. And of course, their expectation, their needs matter. Another point, another axis is the holistic or multidimensional domain. And of course, this is another point that we will debate later in the breakout rooms. In the analytical concept, we wanted to highlight that impacts should be measured considering a multidimensional approach. When we say holistic, this means that impact cannot be considered only in one domain as a positive or negative effect. There should be balance in a holistic way. And this is important to understand what kind of externalities cultural heritage intervention can produce. And of course, the multi-stakeholder approach and impact assessments on different domains are really interrelated and interlinked. The last point, which is the third axis, is time. As Shakitano highlighted in her presentation, it's important to define ex ante objectives and expected impact. And also the Court of Auditors said, please define clear and between brackets, measurable impacts. So it's important to define the time, and objectives and expected impact should be defined ex ante, but also, of course, there is an ex post time. And the ex post time highlights also unexpected impact, and unexpected impact are not only short time, but they can be also long time. And of course, this is a huge debate about the span of time we should consider. The last slide is about the SoPHIA's analytical concept that also Annalisa Cicerchia highlighted. And if we want to look for an impact assessment model, we should consider, of course, very important main questions. Who assesses? Who defines the objectives? Why? And this is about, of course, topics like power that Riva highlighted before. What kind of impact? And this, of course, is always related to people and domains for whom and how, what methods we could use in assessing the impact of cultural heritage intervention, and of course, when. We think that Beatrice could give a very interesting and intriguing answer to these questions, and debating also the analytical concept we propose of course, to gather information to get to the first draft of our impact assessment model. Thank you very much. And of course, this is our presentation, but this is the product of the whole consortium all together. So it's not only the presentation is by Michela, Lucia, and myself, but this is the outcome of the deep work of all the consortium. Thank you very much.